and welcome to Add More Zest. My name's Rebecca, and I thought while today is a smidge sunny, I would show you my quilting space. I don't have a lot, but I have mentioned it on my channel and a few of you said you'd like to see it. So this is the corner of my conservatory where most of my quilting bits are. I've been quilting for just under a year, so I don't have too much yet, but I do have a cabinet, and then I have an IKEA Raskog trolley, and then just a little expansion on the floor down there with some magazines and a couple of quilt patterns, but quilty bits. So first up, to show you, this is the unit that is always out. This is not always on top of here. What this is the top to a Raskog, and it sits on the top of here with my quilting mat. But I've popped it here because this is where I do my ironing of my small pieces as I'm piecing a quilt. So I use a little cry cut iron, and it saves me getting my big iron out. I just get my big iron out when I'm ironing the quilt top and the backing for the final part. I also then have my well-used rulers here. So I have 3 sizes of the block clock ruler. Love those for half square triangles. And then I have a few of the creative grids in a few different sizes. I do have one that is 2.5 inches wide and twice as long as this back ruler, but that hangs up in my craft room. And then just behind there I have my tailor's clapper, and then the window to the kitchen. So yeah, so that is what goes on the top of there. And then in my cart is where I have most of my stuff. So just to spin you around, ignore the heater. Oh, and Luna. I also sit on top of my quilting mat the extender table for my sewing machine that sits on the windowsill. So I pull that round here and attach the table if I'm quilting, and then I've got the full length of the table to use. Piecing, I tend to sit there as well. It's only when I'm binding I move it to this side so that the weight of the quilt can go on this part of the dining table. But that's where my sewing machine sits, with my little pot that my daughter made me, that she painted like the first ever quilt I did, which is so sweet. But yeah, that heater normally sits in front of this cupboard. Oh look, Luna's having a sniff. So this is my tool cart. This is where I have most of my supplies. So in the top is where I have my most reached for. So I have my threads, my bobbins, my fabric scissors. I have, this is just a piece ready for using as a leader or an ender. But I do also have, from my scraps, I have some 2-inch squares that I think what I might do soon is, when I have some light or white fabric, I'm going to pair them up and use those as leaders and enders and eventually make a quilt. I have some pins and my pin cushion, tape measure, fabric pen, bobbin winder, tape, 1/4-inch seam tape, my little flower thing for when I'm chain piecing, I can cut them quickly. This is where my walking foot normally lives, but it's currently on the machine, so it has my 1/4-inch foot, my needles, my little brush, things for basically, I clean out the machine every time I switch from walking foot to piecing foot. So that's there. I then have a rotary cutter, a little bag. This has got a few little quilting clips in it. I tend to use this when I'm hand sewing the binding. I've got a spare blade, and we've already seen my threads. So they're my grabbed pieces. And then going down, I currently actually just have some empty pots. I got some of these pots from B&M. They're great when you are either cutting a load of fabric and have a load of scraps that you sort of want to keep together to ready to go in the bin or get sorted out, or if you're doing a load of small piecing. you can store them in those. And a lint roller, because fabric gets everywhere. I have a very small cutting mat. I use this one when I am cutting the likes of half square triangles, trimming up my blocks. This is a really handy one. And then I actually have a smaller pressing mat. I got that for Christmas. That's mainly when I go somewhere quilting. It just fits into a bag easier to take a smaller one. So at the moment that lives there. I have a quilted block. I did a practice chevron block for my sister-in-law's quilt, and I put it in a quilt sandwich. This is basically just used to test my machine. I only did this the other week, but I've got one row of stitching there. It's just so I can test my tension when I first put my thread on before I start quilting. This is leftover bits from a quilt I recently made for my daughter's friend at work. I'll show you in a minute, but I make a block with the remnants from every quilt that I've made, and for some reason for this one I have hardly any remnants. So I've got these two pieces of fabric. I'm going to see if I can just get, because my fabric shop does like 10cm lengths, so I think I just need a 10cm length of one of these fabrics to be able to make up my block. So that's just sat there waiting for that. But as I say, I'll show you those blocks in a minute. They're in my cupboard. Then I have my mini pocket book of lists. Sorry, Luna is scratching the chair. Luna, do you mind? Thank you. No, she doesn't mind at all. Yeah, so I use this to pop down details for a quilt. So my latest quilt I'm working on is actually that one that Luna's currently sniffing. I just finished quilting that last night for my sister-in-law. It needs trimming up, needs the binding added, and I need to wash it so the blue lines disappear. But yeah, I note down all the details and the sizing for a quilt on there. And then I have sort of extras, but maybe not used as much. So I actually pin basted that quilt yesterday. I much prefer spray basting, but anyway, I had to send hubby out for some more pins. I must have used 300 and odd pins. But yeah, I have pins there. I have just this piece of foam stuff. It's really good for getting lint off your cutting mat. Just rub this across and it'll get the lint out. I've got a couple of extra rotary cutters, some free bits I've got in a magazine, just sort of sat in there. That's got more basting pins. Then I have this little tub. This is from Home Bargains. Comes in a pack, but I've actually only ended up using one. I store my extra feet in there. I only tend to use the walking foot and the 1/4 inch. Occasionally I'll use one of these others, but I've just popped them all in there so I can see them. Then I have tubs. So these are little clips that I use to hold my fabric. The crocodile clips, like what you get on a shirt. Sorry, Luna wanted to come out. Then I have some English paper piecing templates I've not messed with yet. Some more little quilting clips. What's in that last one? Oh, other machine bits that I just don't particularly need to use very often. So they all sit in the sort of least accessible place. But yeah, the cart is basically for my tools. I mainly use this top one or this second one, especially when I'm, say, testing tension or writing bits or starting a new project. I'll pull out all these tubs. So that's my Raskog cart. And then, oh, if I can reposition myself, this is my cupboard. My cupboard that brings me joy. So I have on the top, this is all my yardage. So if it will fit on a piece of A4 grey board is what I use, because the stickers for the shop come with one of these as backing, and I have loads of them. So I use these to pop my fabric on. Now this cupboard does go up further than it looks like, so I can fit things in there, but if you can see, I just fold it round. I've actually gone lengthwise so that I can see the nice edge of the fabric, and then I just use 2 of those crocodile clips just to pin the fabric onto the board. If I have any decent sized scraps of the same fabric, okay, I'm going to fight putting that back later. If I have any decent sized scraps of the same fabric, I actually put them in with that fabric. So I roll them all up in together. It makes sense for me at the moment to at least have all the same in the same place. I then have my Quilt Builder card deck from Kim. Basting spray. This one has got like practically nothing left in it, which is why I used the clips yesterday. I tried to get basting spray from Hobbycraft. They actually don't do it, would you believe? So I started basting with clips, realised I was running out of clips, tried to look. Hobbycraft only did the tiny basting clips, which are no good for quilting. Actually found them at Dunelm. So hubby went, picked me up a couple more boxes and actually found some temporary adhesive for fabric. So, but I'd already started basting, so I carried on. Anyway, I digress. It's a little moan that Hobbycraft doesn't have stuff, but if you need quilting things, try Dunelm. So yeah, then I have, of course, fabric going back to sort of black, grey, white. Some of these I have plans for, some of them I don't. So this is going to be the backing for a fabric, a quilt I'm going to do for Luna. This is a backing for a quilt that I have a pattern for, and this is the main body colour. So those two are already in mind for the quilts. There's a couple of others in there that are planned for quilts. Then we go down to the next shelf. I have a couple of quilt kits still from that I picked up from the Festival of Quilts, so I have 2 there to do. I have a cushion kit to do. That's a kit I plan to do for the quilt for Luna. It's like blues and things. And then I have, I think, a bag kit. Yeah, a bag kit that I'm thinking of using this bright fabric for. But anyway, they're my kits of things to do. These are my scraps. So I did sort out my scraps the other week, and most of them are cut into either 2.5-inch strips for binding or 1.5-inch strips for I don't know what yet. That depended on, of course, the size of the scraps, but my plan is to process through my scraps and they'll either be big enough to fit in here, which is less than a yard, or they'll go on a yard, or they'll go into 2.5-inch strips, 1.5-inch strips, or potentially 2-inch squares. So these are the rest. Some of these I've bought in 1/2 yard, like these gorgeous greens here were purchased in 1/2 yard. These are scraps. Some of these are less than 1/2 yard. These are left over from backing of a quilt. That was a backing, those were a backing, so was that. That wasn't. But basically I just fold them and again clip them. So some of them are folded thicker than others. It really depends. This one I have 2. So there was some left over when I prepped the backing and some cut off from the bottom of the backing. But yeah, anything that is a decent size chunk, I don't want to cut them all into strips and then not be able to use them for something else. And behind that I have 3 jelly rolls and 3 charm square packs. This jelly roll I have a plan for. The fabric for it's up above. The others I don't yet have a plan for. It was one of my fabric sprees when I just, yeah, it was pretty. It was pretty. Now I am on the idea train that I try to use what I have before you know, I don't mind buying fabric to go with a project, or buying fabric for a specific project I want to do if I don't have something, but I'm going to try and avoid picking up fabric just because. I say try and avoid because it doesn't always happen. Then I have my fat quarters. So these are actually stored in the large stackable boxes, again from Home Bargains. I have 9 of them. When we first started quilting, me and Caris did pick up quite a few fat quarters. These ones, absolutely gorgeous. These are from Love Beth. And these have all been folded over quite a few times, and then there is a clip, if it will focus, there is a crocodile clip just pushed in either side. It does fold them up in effect quite a bit bigger than they need to be, but I think it looks so much nicer. So I have those fabrics from Love Beth in one. I have some plain solid fat quarters that I got from a magazine. Then I have a couple of sets. So Catherine wants a quilt making in this, though she realises she's going to have to wait a bit. These were picked up at the Festival of Quilts, and then the rest are primarily random. So some of them were given to me by my niece because she had a load of fat quarters. Some of them me and Caris picked up. I do have a plan for using some of these, mainly these peaches and blues, I think. I have a quilt pattern in mind to use for those. I've just have projects that I need to finish first. So they're all my fat quarters. At the moment there is no more room for any more, so my plan is to possibly do a fat quarter project soon, so at least they have room for more if needed. And then last but by no means least, I have my project boxes. So I currently have 3. So I have the project box for my sister-in-law's quilt that I just showed you. So this has the rest of the backing fabric that was trimmed off the bottom of the quilt. That's for the binding, which I'll be doing soon. That's come off one of these. Then we have some of the scraps left over, because some of these were purchased in fat quarters, and I didn't quite have the exact fabric measurements when I went to pick up these, and then I do have one extra block. So all this will get processed when the quilt is finished, and I'll get it processed and I'll get it popped away in either here or in my strips or in my 2.5 inch squares. So yeah, that is my quilt for my sister-in-law. That is my final block, which I'll show you in a minute, and then this is my longer term project. This is a quilt kit I got from like a sewing event that I went to. I've worked on it while I've been there. It's got my backing fabric in it, but I've still got all these pieces to sort of sew together, and I have been doing some of it in between each project, but these half square triangles, you make a good couple of hundred of those. So it's taken a lot of time, but it is actually very close to being finished. This is a free pattern, I think. Yeah, I'm sure it was a free pattern because she wouldn't have used it otherwise. Which pattern is this one? Starry Night Quilt, it's called. You find the free pattern. Yeah, it is a free pattern. AGF. Collection featured by AGF Studio, called Starry Night. So it's a free pattern, and then she added some extra sort of little hints and tips of things that she came across while she was working on the free pattern. But that is project number 1. That's what I call my more complicated, fiddly project. That may end up holding 2 inch squares in the future. It may end up holding English paper piecing. it may end up being another quilt that just has a lot of steps. But I have a long-term project box, a current project box, which is my sister-in-law's quilts, and then I have a box for my blocks. So I picked this die up from Festival of Quilts last year. It makes this star here, or star in a star. But my idea was I wanted to make a block from the scraps of fabric for every quilt that I've made. So if anybody's seen my other quilts, you'll know this is the patterns that I used for my first ever quilt. It's actually still on the chair under my sister-in-law's quilt. This was the back, no, this wasn't the backing fabric. This was half of the triangle. There was 2 of these with 1 of these to make a block. So I've used scraps to make myself a star. I then have, in fact, you should have seen all of these if you've seen all my quilting videos. This is from the baby quilts. So of course this was the backing and a little bit of sashing. So I've used that as the main background. Then I have a Christmas quilt. There was still only the same ratio of this as there was of this in the quilts, but I've of course used more in the block. I don't want the ratios to necessarily be right. I want the block to look nice and just remind me of a quilt. This was the quilt I did for Catherine. So this was just a lot of 2-inch squares with white and colour. This is her background fabric, whereas this was in the front of the quilt. And then Caris wanted the same quilt. The difference is I used a slightly different background for hers, and her backing was Spider-Man. So this one's got a bit of a different look, even though the quilts look very similar when they're done. This was my Christmas winter quilt, sorry, that's what I call this one, my winter quilts, with gorgeous blues. And then this was a coins pattern quilt. This was the backing, and that's what I used in the blocks, and that was gifted to my nephews, well, the whole family. So yeah, I have a block from every single quilt that I've made. As soon as I've made up that pink one that I showed you in my cart before, so I have enough scraps for the big triangles. I have scraps for the small triangles, is the only thing that's going to show a lot of the different colours, because I had hardly any of the fabric left at all. So it's actually the backing fabric that's going to make all these big ones. And what I want to do is just see if I can get, preferably this, to use where it's currently got white, and possibly in the middle as well. So yeah, but that's the only quilt that I've had to actually potentially buy material for the block, but I'm enjoying it, and eventually my plan is to make a quilt of all my quilts. So that's what that box is. So yeah, that is my fabric storage. If you saw my craft room tour, sorry, it cut me off. If you've seen my craft room tour, I do have some things in my craft room. So I have my big cutting mat, I have my batting, I actually have a bag with scraps for my batting, I have my quilt machine for cutting out that die, and I have that die in there as well. And then primarily after that it's just boxes with the girls' quilt stuff in, but this is where most of mine is. So yeah, let me know your thoughts. Are you a quilter as well, or have you just come along for the nosy because why not? Completely happy with either. Doesn't bother me. But yeah, that is my quilting storage cupboard, and my current quilt, and actually my winter quilt and my first ever quilt are stored on that chair as well. But yeah, that is my quilting space, where you'll find me at the weekends primarily. I tend to quilt at the weekends, and I've just realised I'm waffling on and you're looking at something boring. You should look at pretty fabrics. I mean, look, you can see why I put those on the front, can't you? Aren't they just gorgeous? Absolutely gorgeous. But yeah, that is my quilty stash. If you do have any questions, do bob them in the comments down below, and I will try to answer them the best I can. I'm not going to be becoming a quilting channel, but I will on occasion show you a finished quilt, or in this case show you my storage as it was requested. But thank you all so much for watching, and I'll speak to you all again soon.